Hi, welcome back to Stock Talk. This is Joe Rabil from Rabil Stock Research. So today I want to step back a second because I've gotten a number of different questions in email about screens, probably more than anything else I've been receiving lately. So I did want to cover one thing, and most of them have to do with ADX. So I wanted to just cover one thing. It might be a little confusing the way that I have set this up, but I wanted to make sure it was clear to everybody. So I am going to cover that. So let's get into the agenda. So yeah, I want to talk about my favorite ADX screen and the reason why I use the settings I do on this screen. And then I want to show. I'm going to show two different examples, and I'm going to show why there's if I use one screen, I can identify two different patterns that I find to be very, very powerful. And then when we're done with that, I'm going to go through the requests that came through. I've had a decent amount of requests since it's been 2 weeks since we've done the show. Anyway, let's go ahead and just briefly, I'm going to say my services can be found at rabilstockresearch.com. I send out 2 reports each week, trying to identify the best looking patterns I can find, going through thousands and thousands of charts each week. In addition to that, I do give analysis on the indices as well as the sectors. If you're interested in trying the service, you can plug in the coupon code StockTalk and get the first 2 months for $50. Let's go ahead and switch over to the charts. And so I've got my setup with 4 time frames: monthly, weekly, daily upper right, hourly upper left. Now, the screen that I'm going to show you is for ideas that, and the reason why I like to do it this way is because I can identify stocks that are monthly, weekly setups, 2 different types of monthly, weekly patterns, and I can also identify stocks that have low ADX on the weekly that could be showing strength on the daily chart just by looking at this one screen. Now, if you look at what the screen is, I'm using ADX 1414, the standard ADX, less than 20 on a weekly time frame. And the reason why I'm doing that is there's a couple of reasons. Number one, I use the 1414 because it's a slower moving ADX. It doesn't have the peaks and valleys that we get with the 1313 version. And I actually find that to be an advantage when I'm doing the screening because I want to know if I have a 25 line or a 20 line, I want to know that it's not going up and down like this. And typically, because the ADX 1414 is a slower moving line, if it's below a line, which I'm using 20, then it's probably going to stay there for a little while, and it's not going to poke above and below. It's not going to have as much volatility as the 13.8 version settings, which is what I use for the chart. And even when I run this screen, when I'm looking at the individual charts, and I go through and look at the individual stocks that pass the screen, I am using my 13.8 version in the settings. So I do it this way. It sounds a little confusing, but the reality is I just want to make sure when I'm looking at this, I know that if an ADX 1414 is less than 20, there's a pretty high probability that the ADX 13.8 is going to be down around 15 or even lower potentially. Now, you could switch this down to 15 and say less than 15, but you're going to reduce the number of stocks, and I don't think it's necessary to do that. But if you wanted to reduce the number that are passing, you could do that. The ADX being the ADX 1414, when it's below 15, when it hits 15 or lower, you can expect that there's going to be a shift in trend pretty soon. So if we get that kind of a reading, that's not a bad screen if you really want to zero in on ADX that are low ADX. But for me, I just want to focus in on stocks that have the pattern that I'm looking for. So that's really the starting point. Now, the reason why I like using this screen and the reason why it can be so effective at finding more than one pattern is I've got the keys chart up. And so you can see the low ADX pattern that is taking place on the weekly chart. And that stayed below, it went below 25 and stayed below it for quite some time, several months. And we had a pattern forming where price was kind of working sideways here. Now, so that's a really bullish pattern. This bullish pattern, and I consider it bullish in the fact that we've gone through this consolidation phase and we don't have any real sign of selling through this phase. And actually, if you notice, during this last period, the green stayed above red even before the breakout. The breakout's up here, but even before that, green was well above red during this phase. So I view that as a bullish pattern, a bullish, healthy consolidation pattern. Now, if you go and look at the monthly actually had a strong ADX reading, and it was pulling back towards 25 or just under 25, while this was pulling back to the 18 month. So it got away from the 18 month, and then it spent some time consolidating back towards the 18 month. And that was what was taking place while this was going sideways. So this is a really powerful pattern because I know I've got a long-term uptrend in place on the monthly chart. Look at these moving averages. The 18's above the 40 and both lines are rising, and we have an ADX that's still above 25. So that's pattern number one. Now the second one I'm going to show you is Rambus. And we can look at this now, look at the ADX, same pattern where we have this low ADX for a pretty significant period of time, and price is working basically sideways, but notice how green stayed above, especially for the last part before the breakout took place. So we've got this low ADX in place on the weekly, same pattern. The difference is, look at what's going on the monthly chart. During this phase, we have low ADX on the monthly. So it hasn't really broken out on the bigger picture yet. It's not in an uptrend yet. But what I'm identifying is a stock that has low ADX weekly, low ADX monthly, but green is above red, and we're forming this long sideways line. So if I can see a long sideways line like this, where I've got this horizontal line in place that keeps being tested but not broken, I want to go down to the weekly chart and look for breakouts. So I'm essentially, with one screen, I can find these two patterns. So the first is the pullback pattern. So on the monthly chart is the pullback pattern towards the 18 month. And the second one is the low ADX pattern where you've been going sideways and now we're looking for a breakout. So I've got two things going on at the same time in one screen. The other thing that it's benefit to, I'll just point out, is that we've got, if we have a low ADX condition here, we can go looking for strength on the daily chart and look to buy the first pullback after the ADX gets going above 25. So I just think, it's a good combination to be able to look for all these different things in one screen. I like to do fewer screens and maybe have a few more stocks pass. But knowing what I'm looking for, and this can find me three different patterns, literally. Now, if you're more inclined to want to play charts off the daily, then you'd want to do this low ADX pattern on a daily chart. Do ADX 14, less than 20 on a daily, and then you'd be moving one time frame up. You'd have your looking for your big ADX strength on the weekly chart, or low ADX on the weekly chart, and then be triggering off the daily, or maybe even going down to an hourly to help. So anyway, hope this is helpful. Let's go ahead and get into the individual stocks and get through some of the analysis. Okay, so I've got my chart set up in place. I got the list over on the right. So I've got the monthly in the bottom left, weekly bottom right, daily upper right, and then an extra weekly. And on this weekly chart, I do the relative strength, and I also have the zigzag overlaid on the price action of the weekly, which I do like. And the other thing I thought I'd mention is that I use a 10-year monthly, 3-year weekly, and a 6-month daily. And they give you basically the same perspective because I'm using the same moving averages, MACD and ADX setup on each time frame. So I want to make each time frame look the same based on how much I'm looking back in time. So anyway, I just thought I'd add that. Let's start with Caterpillar. This is actually a great example of a low ADX on the weekly. So we see this low ADX. This is something that would have passed or is passing this screen. And so we can evaluate what we were just talking about kind of in real time here. So the monthly chart is showing a decent ADX reading on the move to the upside. Now, again, I always like to look at the lower time frame. We got a strong move to the upside and a pullback to the 18-month, but I don't just buy right at the 18-month line and just assume it's going to hold. I'm looking for things to develop. And one thing I thought I'd mention here is that we do have some overrun on the MACD. You see how we broke this zero line and moved down through? But notice how it also made a double bottom. So if we zero in on this a little bit, we moved up and then we've come down and sort of made a little bit of a double bottom with improving histogram momentum in place as well. And notice how price went into the zone between the 18 and the 40 and then came out and tested. Now, the reason why I like to look for that in this pattern is the opposing trend pattern to the monthly, right? I want this going down while the monthly is going up because that's telling me that I've worked off the overbought condition and now I'm waiting for the first sign that this time frame is getting back in line with the monthly. What I can do when I look at this upper left chart with the zigzag, I can see that I've made an ABC down. So I've got an ABC down, and notice how that finds support right at the 18-month line. So what I can do with this, I can draw the downtrend line in place, and then I can look and see, and I know I've made a test now because I can see the lower high and a higher low is made. And then as we turn up, I've now completed the 1, 2, 3. So, I mean, yes, the safer play on these is always to look for the first test of the 18 after it turns up on the weekly. So, you know, as I look at this, it hasn't actually done that. Last time it came down through the 18. So I like to see a test of the 18. But if I have price structure in place like this and low ADX on the pullback, I'm definitely willing to play this pattern. It's a little overbought right now, so I'd probably look for some kind of a little pullback in the short term. Let's go to THRY. So this is a little sloppy. Notice just look at this on the, I mean, this is something you want to notice about stocks you're trading. Do you see all the wicks that this has? See all these, the body versus the wick to the outside of the body on these candlesticks are all over the place. Not an ideal type of stock, in my opinion, to be a trader in. It wouldn't bother me so much if I wanted to play it longer term necessarily, but just knowing that that's taking place would scare me away a little bit, just because it just happens so often. And if we notice, we tried to break out and then it kind of came back down through. Now it's trying to break out again and it's sort of giving it up. So, I mean, the momentum characteristics on this are pretty decent, but I don't know. Just based on what I'm seeing here, it would be one that I would just pass on, especially based on what just happened on the daily. That was pretty harsh selling here over the last few days. Let's look at U.S. steel because I noticed in my reviews that the steel stocks are starting to act a little bit better. And I think this is sort of intriguing. Notice how on the correction, so we had a move to the upside that peaked out up here in price. Notice where MACD peaked out and now has been worked down to the zero line. And now we've got this double bottom that's taking place. And price is actually making a higher bottom. So I am intrigued by this. And I also like the idea of using the downtrend line. Now that hasn't been taken out yet. So I would probably prefer if it played out like this. If it fails here, maybe cups around and then breaks the downtrend line after forming a little bit of a hook. If it did that with green DI holding 25, then I would consider that break of the downtrend line a pretty good trigger. It can be used either way, but I would prefer it not be overbought on the daily chart when it actually breaks that downtrend. But I would be watching these steel stocks just based on how they've been trading here over the last few weeks. TMST. So the question I got on this was how to handle this consolidation pattern. Because if we look at what's taken place, we made a move to the upside and we had MACD get pretty far away from the zero line. And it's been trying to work its way back down. And price is just going sideways and it's pretty choppy the way it's working. You know, you see these tops, it looks like it's trying to break out and then it comes back down and tests the low. It's been ratcheting around. I don't necessarily really want to play in this while it's consolidating. I'm looking for something a little bit more confirmed. The ADX is very strong here, so I would be going down to the daily chart. The problem is the real trigger is taking out the highs here, breaking out. And if you notice when it did it, it was overbought when it broke out. So I think at this point now, I'd be seeing if this can hold and then coming back up through this area. And I mean, this is another steel stock. So yeah, I'm definitely liking the ADX strength on the monthly, the ADX strength on the weekly. And now notice on the daily chart, the ADX is starting to climb. So normally when I see the ADX climbing on the daily chart, I'm looking for the first pullback and I want it to be orderly. I'd like it to hold somewhere in the 16, 17 range. I don't want it to come all the way down to 15 or 15 and a half, but I don't really want to play this inside this range unless I'm going to go down to a small time frame and play it really from down here to here. So I would just be playing these little range trades if I'm going to play it inside the consolidation. Otherwise, I'm looking for a confirmed breakout pattern. And I think if this gets going, it could be a pretty good move. DFIN. So the question on this was, we had this we had the makings of an opposing trend, but if you notice what happened, price got back above both moving averages before the 18 crossed down below the 40. So we really haven't had a setup until we got to here. I mean, this is a pretty important distinction. This is what I talk about in my book. I think it's just what I'm looking for is the first close. I want the price to close below the 18 while the 18 is below the 40. And then I know I have this opposing trend in place and I can look for a trigger to the upside. But that actually didn't happen until just recently. And the other thing that was taking place is we did have a zero line reversal with low ADX. I mean, you could have looked to play the downtrend line break. The problem with that is that we were still pretty far away from the 18 week. So I don't like to play the zero line reversal when we haven't come back down to the 18 week. So I hope this makes sense to the person that asked this question, but that's how I would be handling. Now I would be watching this. Now we're getting closer to the 18 week. But it's looking a little, I don't know, the MACD is coming back down through the signal line. The monthly chart is a little far from its 18-month line. So I'd like to see this stabilize here. I don't really want to see this make another lower low because I think the MACD will start rolling down. So anyway, probably not one that I'd be too focused in on right this second. NATI. Really caught in a channel here. We can see this with the zigzag. Yeah, it tried to get going. It's trying to hold the 18-month, but look at how this just keeps zigging and zagging, just going sideways. We don't really have any strength on a relative basis either. I'd like to see this get through this resistance area of 47, something like that. And then I might be a little bit more intrigued. We can see on the weekly chart, we're working sideways. We have low ADX, but I want to see this when we have low ADX on a time frame, even though we're at the zero line, I want to see a breakout of a trend line break. A trend line break would be taking out this 46, 47 area. So nothing to do until that happens at this point. CCI tried to get going here. Made a move to the upside, but notice when it broke out, it was overbought. It was extended away from the 18 on the weekly, and it sort of extended away from the 18 on the daily. And again, when I see that, I want to see a check back and see if it can hold. And this is not the kind of pullback I would be interested in. Too violent, lots of selling, and we're probably now caught in a trading range where 200 is the upside and the low side is maybe closer to 175. Apache APA. So I'm intrigued by what's going on here. I like what happened. I like how this went underneath this bottom and now has recovered that breakdown. Big violent sell-off to the downside, and now we're above that level. So I think this level is kind of important. If you notice, we just tested it again right here on this pullback. That was this pullback right here. So we're in an area where I could definitely get interested in this. I like the ADX action on the weekly chart. What's missing is on this move to the upside, yeah, we've got some green DI, but I probably would like to see the ADX get going a little bit more. in the near term, or see a little bit better test of the 18. Maybe the next pullback to the 18 would be their next real opportunity here. But I do like the look of this. And I like the fact that this recovered this big gap down and is now moving back to the upside. Google is, so this is something we've been talking about, and some of these big tech stocks had a great year last year. You can see where it opened the year here, just went up the whole year, and then hit on this 3,000 big round number and kind of has stalled out. But now that we're into a new calendar year, it's very possible this will want to correct a little bit and maybe work its way back down a little closer to the 18-month in the short term. Not necessarily turn into some kind of a violent decline, but maybe we're going to get this MACD line a little bit closer to zero for the first time in a while. So I think it's a little too overbought to be playing. I think we've seen a little bit of signs of distribution. Notice this daily chart. Look at the red DI starting to break out here. So I think its best case scenario is a channel forming. I don't know that I'd be on the lookout to be buying a dip right now and looking for a big move through 3,000 or anything like that. I don't think that's in the cards here. It might just go sideways, but I think the two options are sideways and pull back a little bit deeper. ADSK. So let's just look at the price structure because I like to put it all together. I'm looking at MACD, I'm looking at ADX, but let's just look at the weekly chart with the zigzag so we can really isolate the price structure. I had a bottom here, and then I made a higher low, another higher low, and I can draw a trend line off of this higher bottom, and I probably have to go a little to the right because I don't want to pass through prices, but I can draw in this trend line like this. And notice what happened. We broke the trend line and then we tested this high, and now we've come down through this prior low here, and now we're testing the 18-month and looking like we're turning down from there. Also, notice what the relative strength has been doing. This has actually been going down while price was going sideways. And now we're starting to see this tip over a little bit. So one of the things I talk about early in my book is I don't like to buy, I like to buy weakness, but I want to buy good weakness, not bad weakness. I think this is bad weakness because you're breaking the 18-month, you have poor relative strength. The red DI on the weekly chart is starting to kick in a little bit, and the MACD lines are clearly breaking through the zero line. So I think there's some risk here. I think the question is this going to hold 250 and turn into a trading range, or is it going to break 250 and have a lot more downside risk to it? Let's look at Kimberly Clark, KMB. This is pretty intriguing because this spent the entire year, so this whole year in 2021 stayed inside the year of 2020. So we can look at the range and we can see that the whole range of this year was inside this year. So this is an inside year. I know a lot of people look at inside days, maybe inside weeks. I like to look at inside years because now we're taking out the high of this inside year. I think that bodes well. The one component that's missing is we haven't gotten the green DI going on the weekly. But we are seeing improvement in the ADX on the daily chart, and it's always going to start there. So we have low ADX monthly, low ADX weekly, and now the daily is starting to kick in. I'd be watching for pullbacks as an opportunity here. Let's look at Block, SQ. So, you know, again, let's just, I want to focus in on this a little bit because if we look at the price structure here, we can see we had a break of a trend line. If I draw in a trend line, I mean, I can draw this trend line in, and but we went to another new high. So I'm just going to use this trend line here because we went to a marginal new high. We could use that, and then we went up and tested. That's your 2, and then coming back down through this low here is your 3. That was essentially confirmation that the trend is shifting, and then not long after that we broke the 18-month line. Look at the weakness that's taking place in the RS line. So again, this is not the kind of weakness we really want to be playing. I don't think this, now we could get a bounce out of this at some point, but notice since the beginning of this year they're selling this pretty hard. So you got to be careful here. I would not be all that interested in this unless I'm going to play it on a really small time frame. This needs to go through a rehab phase and rebuild and mend. Let's look at Humana. Humana was actually bumping its head on this area, and I thought it might have a chance of trying to break out, but it never did. And now we've got this big gap down today. Now it just goes on the back burner. I mean, nothing's going on here. We're probably going to be caught in a trading range. I wouldn't expect a whole lot of excitement, but this is why when we have low ADX, we wait for a breakout. We don't want to try and pre-guess the breakout move. We want to actually do it. Wait for price to confirm the breakout when you have low ADX pattern in place. You had low ADX daily, low ADX on the weekly, and so we're looking for that kind of confirmation. Okay, well, we've run out of time. Thanks for joining me. Please feel free to reach out. My contact information is listed. And stock requests can be sent to stocktalk at stockcharts.com. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.
Hey guys, Dave Keller here with StockCharts.com. Thanks so much for watching our video. If you enjoyed it, and we hope you did, hit the like button right below. Also, we have so much new content every day. Consider subscribing to the channel. Just hit the subscribe button in the video or right below. Thanks for watching. Stay safe. Have a fantastic day.